Before we get started, I wanted to just remind people of a couple things. The last webinar of this year will be on December 15th at 12 p.m., same time, same place. And that will feature Tom Kiffney and his work on triploid versus diploid oysters. And you can keep an eye out for the registration link, which will be posted to our social media and will be circulated around some email lists. Also, registration for the 25th year of the Northeast Aquaculture Conference is now open. It's being held January 10th through 12th in Providence, Rhode Island. And we've just announced the field trips and workshops taking place on the 10th. So be sure to check those out if you're planning on attending. And you can find more detail. I'm going to turn it over to Evan and Kyle.
Thanks, Sydney. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. As Sydney said, ask a bunch of questions. I think that makes for a more fun conversation at the end here. So Evan, myself, and my farm manager, Ben, traveled to Washington State June 4th of this year. And we wanted to go to Washington because there's a lot going on with aquaculture there, particularly mussels, clams, and oysters, which is, the business that I'm in at the Downeast Institute. It's the business that Evan's in at Blue Hill Bay Mussels, and just seemed like a really great opportunity to go and see what they're doing in their operations and see if we can't learn something that will better our operations. And I can't thank MAIC enough for this opportunity. I believe they still have funding for this program. So if anyone's thinking about trying to check out farm somewhere in the world or learn something, I highly recommend it. They do a great job, and it's so helpful to be able to go and look at other operations and the networking. I've since connected with several of the people that you're going to see on these slides since we've been there in June. And it's great to make those connections from across the country and across the world with fellow aquaculturists. So that being said, we'll take it away here. Hopefully. Yes. So I wanted to start out by looking at Maine versus Washington, opposite sides of the country, but a lot of similarities. According to NOAA, we have roughly the same length of shoreline. Maine actually has slightly more than Washington. And in Washington, it's unique that Puget Sound makes up 2,500 of those acres. And that's where the largest amount of aquaculture is concentrated in Washington State. And that's where we focused our travels around the Sound. Maine has around 160-ish shellfish farms, with new ones starting every day. Washington State has more than 300. Now, some of those farms are owned by the same company. In fact, some of the companies that we're going to be highlighting that we visited have enormous amounts of farms within the same company all over the state in different regions. And it's really unique to see that huge difference from what we see here in Maine. And then if we look at Maine shellfish farming, really a new industry, less than 50 years of growth there, whereas Washington State, they've been out this for over 160 years. And some of the companies we visited have been in business for 150 or more years as a family-owned company, which is really staggering to think about. In Maine, most of our shellfish aquaculture is subtidal, pretty much solely. And then in Washington, most of their shellfish aquaculture is intertidal, except for oyster or mussel farms and a few floating oyster farms. But really, very, very different sort of landscape there, which made for an excellent visit. And if we look at, the numbers here, it's out of my way. There we go. Maine last year, according to the NOAA dashboard here, just shy of $16 million in sales between oysters and mussels, where Washington is over 126 million between clams, mussels, oysters, and geoduck. So quite a large difference in economics between our two states, and that makes for a lot of excitement for me because I see what Maine could be doing. So our journey started from Bangor to Philadelphia to Seattle. And then Olympia was our first stay. In the 4 days that we were there, we visited 2 shellfish hatcheries, 3 mussel farms, 3 oyster farms, 3 clam farms, and a geoduck farm, and 2 processing plants. So we really packed a pretty tight schedule. Scheduling was difficult because of the tides. Because a lot of the aquaculture is intertidal, we really had to be looking at tide charts and thinking about when we can hit these different places, because it's certain times of the day just does not work. We were able to visit 5 different really awesome, unique companies, very different scales, and everyone was just so kind to us. Our first stop was a raw bar, of course. Hit the ground running. I had never had a Pacific oyster or an Olympia oyster, so wanted to get our hands on some of these and sample them. First reaction was that the Pacific oyster is quite a bit different tasting than the Eastern oyster. Much more distinct flavor, a bit more of a seafood flavor than the mild flavor of the Eastern oyster. Took a little getting used to. The Olympias, very similar to our Ballons here, so a very metallic taste. They're dinky little oysters, they're tiny, yeah, really good. And by the time we left there, we really had a taste for them. The second stop, and getting down to business, was the Pacific Seafood Hatchery in Quilcene. Beautiful drive through the Olympia National Forest. Can't recommend that enough. Really remote town. I don't have a lot of pictures for this one because they asked us not to take pictures, but they were gracious enough to let us in, which several of our other hosts were surprised they let us in the door. So we were so thankful. The hatchery was a very large scale operation. The hatchery manager that showed us around commented that the week before we were there, they set 1 billion oysters, which just shocks me at the scale. Most of their oysters are set on shell in bags in large outdoor tanks, and they'll be used for bottom planting in the cluster industry in the shucked market. The hatchery was very large. Most of their algae production was in greenhouses, in large tanks, open air. So lots of little butterflies and stuff flying around. They did have a pure biomass bag system as well. The tanks, their larval tanks, were just enormous, and I've got some pictures further down here from Taylor's that are very similar. But just the size of them is mind-boggling. But to produce 1 billion oysters, you need big tanks. All flow-through systems, whether that's inside or outside for settlement systems. They set, as I said, mostly on shell, but they also had culchless oysters for the half shell market, as well as manila clams. They also produce mussels, but pretty seasonally and not very much. Their main customer for that is Penn Cove, and they've kind of gotten away from the hatchery mussels, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really a fantastic place to get started. Gave us a lot of perspective of the aquaculture industry in Washington, and just really kind hosts. Our next stop was another hatchery, also in Quilcene. This tiny little town has 2 huge hatcheries. Pretty cool. This is Taylor Shellfish's hatchery. They were very gracious, told us to take pictures and video of everything, and it was really awesome to see. This is Molly Jackson, the hatchery manager. She took all the time that we needed, even though they were in the middle of a power outage, which anyone in the hatchery business knows is just the most stressful day of your life. But she took the time to show us around and answer all of our questions, not trying to hide anything at all, which, coming from a for-profit, is pretty refreshing. She answered even our dumbest questions and did it with a smile. Here's a look at some of their enormous larvae tanks. These must be 20 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and hold just hundreds and hundreds, if not billions, of larvae. At that scale, they're not really counting them. They actually dry weight the larvae, which looks like a paste. They're growing in this facility geoduck, manila clam, Pacific oysters. They do a little bit of eastern oysters as well, and mussels for their farm. They also have different scales, so this is a little more common to us in a flow-through larval system, but lots and lots of tanks. They definitely don't do anything small scale at this place. Really, really impressive. They also have a hatchery in Kona, Hawaii, where they produce an awful lot of product there as well. But this is their original hatchery that they started in the 80s. Really cool to see state-of-the-art pure biomass systems. This allows for continuous production of microalgae in a really economical manner, whether it's the 25-liter bags you see in the middle or the very large systems right here for growing out mass amounts of algae. Once they seed these bags with the culture, they can run them for 3 or more months, pretty much continuously pulling off algae as they need it. The mass production systems are piped so they run around the building, not just inside, but also outside. They had a large number of outside tanks to accommodate all of the production needs that they have, which is quite a lot. They really touted these pure biomass systems, and that's definitely number one on our wish list at DEI, is to upgrade to some really smart bag systems. That's on the, hopefully Santa brings us those. Molly spent a lot of time telling us about their selective breeding program for diploid and triploid oysters, from making tetraploids to maintaining genetic lines and looking for desired traits. It's very obvious that they put an awful lot of effort into making a really superior product, and doing it at scale. That's not just oysters, that's also mussels, clams, geoduck. Really, really impressive operation there, with lots of different things going on. Mussel settlement, this is what we really wanted to see. Most of you probably know Downeast Institute is the only commercial mussel hatchery on the East Coast of the United States, and Blue Hill Bay Mussels is the only mussel farm on the East Coast of the United States that's solely reliant on hatchery seed. So looking at what these folks are doing, because they've been at this a lot longer than us, was one of our major things that we wanted to see. And what was shocking, they're basically doing the same thing we are. Even though we've developed this independently. They have a large outdoor tank that they suspend pieces of PVC with settlement material wrapped around it. They put in the mussel pedivelagers and allow them to settle onto the ropes in these highly aerated tanks. Got a video right there. This brown fuzz you see on the top, that's actually the mussels. There's copious amounts of mussels on this rope. And when I say rope, it's actually bag material that they use rather than mussel lobster rope like we do here. And they really like that as a settlement material. And when we get to the mussel farm portion, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But really cool to see that basically we're doing the same thing, even though we've developed the technology independently. Geoduck is a huge product on the West Coast. These geoduck are grown very similar to how we grow softshell clams, actually. I was shocked at how similar they were, where the larvae are grown, then settled onto screens and moved to downweller barrels in outdoor downwellers that are all flow through, and all this water is fed via that pure biomass algae system. Then they're moved to raceway tanks at 2 to 3 millimeters in sediment, because they need sediment at a very small size, and grown out to an 8 millimeter size that they can then be transferred to the farms or sold. These little clams in Molly's hand here are 6 to 8 millimeters. To the farmer, 50 cents a piece to purchase the seed. So very high value right from the start. And the main reason for that is they're not the easiest thing to grow, and the final product is very high value, which we'll get to here in just a minute. But great visit at Taylor's hatchery. They were so kind with their time. And it was really eye-opening to see how similar their operations are, but also, how much further that at least we at Downeast Institute could come to make ourselves more efficient in this field. All right, our next stop was on to Thorndike, which is just north of Quilcene, and we visited the farm of baywater shellfish. This is a large intertidal farm where they're growing oysters, geoduck, and clams. 2 different species of clams, actually. This farm is owned and operated by Joth Davis. He might look a little familiar to you. His brother, Chris Davis, is on this call, works for MAIC. They not only look alike, they also have very similar mannerisms, talk very similarly. Again, so gracious with his time, answered all of our questions, stopped what he was doing, showed us around the farm. We had a wonderful picnic lunch, and really went into a lot of depth on what they're doing, and a lot of history of shellfish farming in Washington. It was a fantastic visit over at Baywater. The most interesting part for me was the geoduck. This is their main product. It's certainly the most important economical part of their business because it is a very high value product. They start out in these little mesh tubes here. That's an extruded plastic mesh, I believe Vexar. And they plant the tubes in the intertidal, and then at high tide, they come by with a diver and put 2 seed per tube. And then at low tide, they come and staple them shut. That's about it. They let them go for 2 years inside the tubes, and then they'll pull the tubes out, and there'll be another 5 years before they harvest this product. And you can see the siphons of the geoduck here sticking up in the sediment. To harvest this product, they come in at high tide with a diver and using a hydraulic wand, loosen the sediment and pull the geoduck out. One thing that I was really surprised about was the lack of mortality due to predation once they get to a refuge size. You would think with these big juicy siphons sticking right up above the mud that they'd be just hammered by predators, but Joth assured me that they survive very well. And it was really neat sitting there and watching the geysers of water come out of these things. When they're exposed, they eject water from their siphons, and it will go several feet in the air. So really, really neat to see that operation. He also has a pretty extensive flip bag system for producing half-shell oysters. These are Pacific oysters. So, basically at low tide, the bags are sitting down. At high tide, the float picks them up and naturally tumbles the oysters. So you get a very good product. The most shocking thing here was the amount of hard fouling that they experience. These bags become absolutely encrusted with barnacles very, very quickly, which, leads to a lot of maintenance. They were, pressure washing bags down there. Quite a stockpile of bags in their storage facility. Really, really cool to see this system in place. And, even though geoduck is their main product, diversifying with oysters helps to keep them busy year round on the farm and keep their number of employees up. It is Joth and his son are the owners there and do a lot of work, but Joth's getting ready to basically pass the torch along. They have a very nice processing system with the said graders with the electric eyes that can separate different sizes of product at scale, as well as a really nice wet storage facility for holding product on land till it can get to market. Joth shared a little bit about the different markets that they explore, obviously looking for the highest end that they can get, both in Washington, direct to restaurants, air freight to places like New York City, but then also imports. Most of the geoducks go abroad. I mentioned we had lunch with Joth, and he shared with us sea chirones. Joth also operates a floating farm where he uses the flip farm system a little bit up the road across the bridge, and also grows kelp. And this is the product that they've developed, which is a puffed product. And I got to tell you, if you see these somewhere, buy them. They are absolutely delicious, and I'm not paid to say that. They're fantastic. Really creative way to get sneak kelp into a snack food and be healthy for people. All right, our next stop, one that we were really looking forward to, was Taylor Shellfish, their mussel farm. They produce mussels in the hatchery, as we've already seen, and then move them to their rafts at a fairly small size, very similar to what we do at Evans Farm. But they have a ton of innovation here that's really unique. So similar to Maine, most of the mussels are grown on rafts, and the reason for that is predation. So you need to protect them from, in Maine, sea ducks. In Washington, a small perch that actually eats the mussels. So in Maine, our mussel rafts are surrounded by nets that go vertically down, but the bottom's open. In Washington, they actually have to completely encase the raft in the net, very similar to a salmon pen. So that's an added problem for sure. This guy's name, Gordon King, originally from New Zealand. Again, just so generous with his time and his knowledge, and really a riot, really funny guy. He basically is a legend in the mussel industry on the West Coast. Learned in New Zealand, then came to Washington. He spends a lot of time in the hatchery as well as the farm, looking after the seed in the settlement tanks. And he told us all about basically the process. You see him holding some fairly fresh seeded ropes that are in need of thinning. They actually go around and hand thin these ropes. They have teams of people crawling all over these rafts, and by hand removing some of the seed and putting it into little pans that are then resocked onto new ropes to spread out and thin the densities. You know, it was really alarming, or not alarming, but it was really cool to see how many people they were employing on these rafts. It definitely takes a village to do this, and the scale of the operation is quite large. Here's a video of their harvest. So what happens here is this metal frame right here is connected on all four corners to some pulleys, and they actually pull the raft on top of this platform, cut the ropes and drop them onto the platform. Then they raise the platform up to where they can reach it with the crane and strip the mussels into exactics, and then shovel what's on the platform into the exactic boxes. All of the processing happens on land, but really creative to you know, limit the amount of drop off you have at harvest time by having a moving platform that goes up and down, and creates a pretty good work platform for the employees there. Next stop was a processing plant. Had to wear hairnets and stuff like that. The plant manager explained to us that Costco is a pretty big buyer and they're very particular. So we donned the gear and went through. Very large facility, very impressive. Lots of people working there. They produce an enormous amount of shellfish. First, we looked at the mussel processing units. Because they're growing Mediterranean mussels, and particularly during the summer, the biss is very weak on them. So this machine right here is a declumper. And unlike Maine mussels, they don't have to run them through a debisser. They do in the wintertime when they're holding on a little tighter, but during the summer, we were there in June, they basically run them through the declumper, and then they're ready to go over to the bagging machine right here. And they're put into 2 to 10 pound bags, depending on what the customer wants, and then boxed up. And these mussels are going all over the place to markets in Washington, but also on the East Coast and abroad. And I absolutely love the sign up here that says, remember, the next inspector is the customer. That's a great way to look at it. In the same facility, they process lots of oysters. This particular operation here was shucking oysters for a frozen half shell product. They also have mechanical separators for shucked product that is jarred up and either sold fresh or frozen. But this unique half shell approach here was pretty cool to see. Lots of people shucking and putting on trays. The volume was staggering. Then the trays are fed through this nitrogen table, which flash freezes them, liquor and all, and then glazes them. And then they're boxed. And the majority of this product, we were told, goes to the Asian market as a frozen product that they say you take them right out, thaw them, and they're just as fresh as if someone was standing there in front of you shucking the product out. So really innovative way to preserve product and be able to ship it everywhere in the world. They produce a lot of geoducks. As I mentioned, geoducks is a really high-end product. At the farm, it depends on the year and the market, but most of them tend to be worth about $40 a piece. By the time they get to Tokyo, they may be upwards of $100 a piece. They went into quite a bit of time telling us about how they're quality and graded, where the higher quality, nice light colored mantle and siphon gets the best price. If they're too dark, they're not as high a quality product. They won't get as good of a price. So they're really looking for this really creamy looking skin on the siphon and mantle. Huge business. I wish I could have filled my pockets with these to bring them back to get that, but DMR would have a heart attack. So our next stop was to the airport to pick up a fellow traveler. Matt Moretti from Bangs Island joined us for the rest of our trip. Matt happened to be traveling to Alaska to go to a kelp conference and had to fly into Seattle anyway, and the stars just aligned. So we had 4 of us from that point on, which is great to incorporate more eyes from Maine to bring back ideas and share technologies. Our next stop was at Hama Hama Oyster Company. These were their upwellers in Shelton. Their upwellers, really cool, are in these boat houses. So they're protected from the weather, really good for the employees to be working. They have gantry cranes in the ceiling so that they don't have to manually lift up the silos as they get heavy. And I thought a really creative way to use infrastructure. The Flupsies they use are Hooper's Island. Flupsies, pretty much off the shelf, plug and play. They love them, had nothing but really good things to say. Very similar to, a lot of the Flupsies in Maine, whether that's a homemade or whatnot. They're run with ice eater pumps. They were currently not running variable speed, but said that they were soon implementing some variable speed pumps to, make more efficient use of flow as the animals grow and take care of the pumps a little bit better. They were very generous again with their time. This lady here is Jessie. She was the site manager there and just shared an enormous amount of information. Nothing was off the table. They took us for a nice boat ride out to see a neighboring mussel farm that was very small, as well as we drove past the Taylor Sea Farms or Shellfish Farm Flupsies as well, which are very large paddle wheel driven units. We weren't able to visit those because of timing, unfortunately, but we got to see that operation. These oysters are all going to their farm in Lillywhop. And this product will almost solely be used for flip bags, very similar to what we saw at Baywater. as well as some bottom planting, but the vast majority will go to flip bags. And then onto the farm at Lilywop, Hama Hama. I think this was my favorite visit. Really, really cool to see a family-owned company that's 150 years old. They've been farming oysters right here on the same chunk of intertidal for 150 years. The company also has some pretty vast holdings in the lumber industry, which is also a similar story to Taylor's Shellfish as well, which is a very old company with their sort of feet in the lumber industry. I don't have a good picture of him, and I'm sorry for that, but this guy right here, his name is Justin Stang. He's the manager here, and again, just like everyone, was so gracious with his time. Took us out into the tidelands, walked around, showed us all of the farm, explained the processes. So here they're growing primarily oysters, but these nets in front of Evan here are to protect manila clams, which they also harvest, as well as purple savory clams. And they mostly go to the oysters is a live product in the half shell market, but they do have a single guy in their processing plant standing there shucking oysters all day. And I've never seen anyone shuck oysters like this guy. It was just smash, smash. He did it so well. And apparently he's been doing it about 20 years. So a lot of these shells you see sitting here have been in his hand at one point in time or another, because after they shuck the product, they dump the shells back out into the tidelands to act as substrate for new oysters to settle onto, or the baby oysters that are already on them to grow up a bit. But as you walk along here, it's just impossible to take a step without stepping on oysters, because they are just everywhere. Most of these are wild oysters that have recruited onto the settlement substrate. And that is the majority of their business appears to be from wild oysters. They have a team of guys that they call oyster cowboys, and like literally they walk around with cowboy hats, Justin said, mostly from the same family from Mexico. And these guys are the stewards of the flats. They know which parts to harvest from and where everything's going. And Justin shared with us, because they're so critical to this business, they are some of the highest paid employees, because they don't have a business without product. So really refreshing to hear a take on that, that, you know, you really put your investment in the people that are bringing your product in and, you know, essentially cultivating your garden. So one of the things that I had questions about going into this is, if they have these huge expanses of mud flats that they're growing oysters on, how do they get around Vibrio? Because during the summer, you know, the tide goes out for hours and these oysters are just sitting here baking in the sun. So how in the world do you sell that product? This is their solution. They use the Hama Hama River as a natural refrigerator. So these buoys you see are all attached to lines with oyster bags full of oysters. And they place them at different places and have different colored bags to denote the different product, whether that's a size or quality. And they'll go out in high tide in this barge and pick them up as they need them. The river stays cold all year long. So during the summer, they're able to put the oysters in here and keep them below 50 degrees all day long, so that they avoid any type of bacteria buildup and issues with Vibrio. And Justin explained to us that even though this is freshwater the majority of the day, there's enough salt water getting into them for them to be able to open up and pump and just stay thriving in this environment. So what a really creative way to get around a big problem. We enjoyed some oysters at the Oyster Saloon there. They have a small shop that they also have picnic tables, and you can purchase a bucket of a dozen oysters. They call it a shuck it bucket, with all of the gloves and sauces and oyster knife. Really creative way to sell your product and really promote your product. Again, Justin sat down with us and had a nice lunch and really was so generous with his time and shared everything. Everything was open book, and really hope that he comes to Maine and takes us up on our offer to visit our places. All right, now we're on to Penn Cove Mussel Farm in Coopville. Penn Cove's another fairly sizable company with mussel, oyster, and clam farms. This guy right here is named Tim Jones. He's a Mainer, and he's the manager there. Once again, spent pretty much the entire day with us, stopping what he was doing, taking a break from his busy schedule to show us around the operation. Penn Cove currently grows almost solely wild capture trossulus, middleish trossulus mussels. So a little bit on the smaller side, thicker shell, bit more dense bisque than the Mediterranean mussels. If you want to see some boats, this is the place you go. Their custom designed harvest boats were mind-blowing. They definitely put a lot of engineering into trying to make the most efficient system for harvesting this product. And they had a number of these. It was kind of neat. Tim took us and showed us like, well, this was our first one, and then we learned from this one and built this one, and then we built this one, and it's like, wow, you guys got some boats. They also have a lot of rafts. Each one of these rafts, I can't remember how many droppers he said, but it's an enormous amount. Very similar to Taylor, they're using a bagging material as the rope substrate that are hanging down. These are about, I think he said 20-foot droppers on these particular ones here. But they have a very large number of rafts in this cove. I believe he said annual production is usually around 2 million pounds. But this isn't just for mussels. This platform out here is actually where they process all of their oysters as well. So these mussel rafts have lines hanging off of them with oyster bags, as well as clams. So they do the majority of their processing on the water and are able to use the same team to be processing oysters and then switch to mussels when it's time to harvest mussels. So it's a great system. They had a really great maintenance staff. Their main operations is only about 5 minutes away from here. So the guys that fix all these mechanical problems when they happen are able to get down there on the water and get things up and moving. And they were also very gracious with their time and really interested in talking to Evan about how he processes his product. And we shared lots of videos, and it was a really great visit there. So here's a video that's a little shaky, but of their processing mussels, and you can see some of the equipment that they've developed. This is a declumper here that moves one way, then spins around and moves the other way to keep them clean. A lot of belt-driven machinery. This guy right here is actually pulling off some discs that are in the rope that make it so the mussels don't slough off as much and keeps them from falling off. And then this conveyor belt here, they call the stinger, is actually able to reach anywhere in the raft from the side of the raft. So if they're harvesting from the middle, they can get it right down to where it needs to be. Then it's fed into a debisser here, and then it goes into a little house where there's a number of people in there doing a final hand sort before they're bagged. So really cool to see that operation. The scale of the operation was pretty mind-blowing. There must have been 20-25 people working on that single boat while they were harvesting mussels. So they definitely throw a lot of people at that problem. So our last stop was another Taylor shellfish site in Samish Bay. And that was pretty much in the very northern part of the state. We unfortunately were not able to go out with the crew there. Their tides are so large at this place that the water literally drains out as far as the eye can see and then some. We were able to view them from the shore with a spotting scope, but barely. A lot of mechanization here, which Bill Dewey, who's the PR guy for Taylor Shellfish, spent a lot of time talking to me about. He also has a farm in Samish, but unfortunately, because of the tides, we weren't able to get all the way out to the sites. But we were able to go to the market here, and they had a bunch of demonstration plots set up. Really cool. I like that a lot. You know, showing tourists and people like how the different products are grown. So they're growing oysters on the bottom. These would have started over here on the left, would have started out in an upweller and then bottom planted. They're doing, as you'll see in the next slide, I believe, mostly Pacific, but they also have Kumamotos and some Eastern oysters as well. They have extensive flip bag systems out here on this flat. They're so far out you really can't see them, but they did have a small plot set up as demonstration, as well as oysters by the cluster, which are grown, set in the hatchery on shell, and then grown out and then put on strings that run right above the mud surface, and they're grown out here for the shucked market. One of the cool things here is a mechanical clam harvester. So this is obviously a custom built machine right here that allows them to drive onto the mud flat. This is typically on a barge, and they drive off of it, and they're able to mechanically harvest the manila clams. This is based off the design of a tulip bulb harvester from Holland, which is what they originally started with, was importing tulip bulb harvesters and modifying them slightly to be able to pick up manila clams. And I'm told this is how the majority of their clams are harvested there, which just the scale and sophistication is really very, very impressive. And then, you know, we were checking out prices, and their Eastern oysters they have on the menu are the most expensive, or at least on par. My favorites of the whole trip were the Kumamotos. Really, really tasty product. We were able to sit there and enjoy some while we looked out over the water and talked to some of the employees there about you know, the quality of the product as well as their feelings around aquaculture. Kind of wrap it up. Some of my takeaways: Washington is absolutely beautiful state. If you have the opportunity to go there, please do. Mountains are unbelievable, and I'm not a paid spokesman for Washington tourism by any means. The farmers were incredibly friendly and generous with their time. Everyone just wanted to share. They wanted to show us what was going on. They wanted to hear about our operations and what we do. So there's an enormous amount of sharing, and really the networking connections we made are invaluable. The businesses with multiple products have so much more opportunity for finding higher value markets, whether that's direct to consumer, direct to restaurants. A lot of them were sending trucks to the airport every day or multiple times per week to get products airlifted to mostly New York City. And I think Evan's going to talk a little bit more about that, but pure biomass algae systems rock. Molly had nothing but good things to say, and they are cranking out some algae. So definitely huge wish list right there. The scale of the hatcheries was mind blowing. Seeing, you know, tanks as high as the ceiling, and really, you know, makes me think that we could scale up quite a lot more. There's obviously a lot of opportunity in intertidal aquaculture in Maine. We have vast amounts of mudflats as well, but leasing tends to be somewhat prohibitive there because of the way that our intertidal is controlled by municipalities. In Washington, I forgot to mention this, they can own intertidal. So they can just purchase intertidal land just as you would terrestrial land. And that's why you see so much aquaculture in the intertidal in Washington, which is very different than Maine. But, you know, everyone that we talked to said Maine's really fortunate to have access to subtidal floating gear leases to the way we do. And DMR gets a bad rap a lot of times, but talking to the farmers over there, they're pretty jealous of our leasing system. So it's kind of eye-opening to go somewhere else and you know, hear them say, geez, I wish our leasing system was like that. And then one thing I didn't put on here, but was something we heard from everyone, which is common problems. The number one problem that we heard people say, lack of staff. I would produce more product, but I cannot get the staff. The one hatchery, Pacific, she said, usually this upweller system, the huge room full of upwellers is full of product, but I do not have the people to produce it. So, you know, it's definitely a major problem on both coasts. with that, I am going to turn it over. Well, one, I'm going to say a big thank you to MAIC and all of our host farms. It was an amazing experience. And I'm going to turn it over to Evan for him to share a few of his real big takeaways.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And thank you, MAIC. It was a great trip. There is a lot of things that we have the same, but the biggest thing they have is they're diversified. They're growing more than one product or even two products. So, but it was a beautiful trip, unbelievable trip. I guess that's all I've got to add. Kyle kind of summed it all up really good. So there you go. I'm all done. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kyle and Evan. That was a really awesome presentation. We're gonna remove spotlights so everyone, I think everyone should be back on screen now. We did have lots of questions come in from the chat, so if you guys have them, maybe you could try pull them up, or we'll just ask you, can read them out. So the first question that we had, going back to the beginning of the presentation, did you guys get an idea of how many mussels they were able to produce at the Pacific hatchery?
Yeah, so they did share that with us, and the number is very small. And the main reason for that is that their main customer was Penn Cove, and Penn Cove operated two different sites, one of which they grew Mediterranean mussels, and one of which the site we visited, where they grow the trossless, which is wild captured. Apparently they ran into some leasing issues and had to abandon their site that they grow the Mediterraneans on. So when we were at the Pacific hatchery, the manager said, we don't even know if we're going to grow any mussels this year, just because the demand for their number one, customer has diminished. So it sounded like they had more oyster production needs than they could handle, again, with the staff that they had. So I would say pretty minimal at this point, but when they were in production, the number that was thrown around was about 1.5 million pounds. They didn't say how many petty villagers or settled animals that was. So we didn't actually see any mussels while we were there.
Gotcha, thanks. Yeah, so next question, I think this was when you were talking about Taylor Shellfish Hatchery. What is the success rate for embryo transition into the D stage? Was the 2 billion number that you referenced, was that larvae or spat?
So that number came from the Pacific hatchery, that they had commented that the week before we had gotten there, they had set 1 billion oyster larvae. They did not share what the starting number was. As anyone in the hatchery biz knows, you're going to lose a lot. So there's no doubt in my mind that they probably had, 5, 6, 7 times that amount to start. They shared a little bit about spawning, but not a lot. So a lot of their spawning is, separating males from females, controlling fertilization. But they also shared that in tanks that size, they can just put the adults in and allow them to spawn as they would, and not run into a lot of problems with polyspermy. One of the things that Molly shared at Taylor was, how do you count billions and billions of animals in an economical manner? And they shared that a lot of times they really don't count them. They just rear them. These are all flow-through tanks that are partially drained every few days, and then fully drained once or twice a week. Again, that husbandry differed between the two hatcheries. But yeah, I don't have a good answer as far as like how many they started with and how many they end up with, but the scale is quite huge.
Yeah, thanks.
Few more questions here. We have a genetic question. Which genetic traits hold higher interest for the hatcheries for selective breeding?
So in Washington, she didn't really share exactly what they were selecting for, other than, she did go into quite a bit of talk on, how they started their tetraploids, and I believe that was working with Stan Allen, if I can remember that correctly, and to make their tetraploids so that they can then make triploids from diploid females. I don't believe she shared any specific traits. Possibly one of the things they were talking about was temperature resilience. And if I'm remembering that correctly, with primarily the intertidal oysters, getting shocked with high summertime temperatures, and then, cold water comes in over top of them and sort of shocks them. So there was definitely some talk around breeding for temperature resilience, but not a lot of context as far as the particular traits they were looking for.
Great. What about, we have a question about what's the average scale of oyster farms out west? Just curious how many farms are small, mid-size, or industry size?
Well, they certainly have a lot more large-scale farms than we do. I think when I was talking with Bill Dewey at Taylor Shellfish, the number that sticks out in my head is 14,000 acres of lease. That's more than everyone in the state of Maine combined, and then a lot. So the scale is very large. We didn't visit any small scale farms. Honestly, I mean, if they have over 300 farms, I'm sure there's lots of small scale farms. Baywater was the smallest farm that we went to out of the group. And Joth didn't really share particular numbers as far as harvest of each product per year, but still a pretty sizable farm and super diversified, from oysters to geoduck to manila clams, purple savory clams. They harvest wild oysters. The diversity was the biggest thing, that all farms have multiple products.
Great, thanks.
So our next question is about if you were able to hear about any if you were able to see any observations or feedback that you received about the challenges that oyster farmers are facing at large out west.
Sure. Well, a lot of the same challenges we are. Opposition to aquaculture, labor, the number one thing everyone said. Every single place we went, if we could get more people, we would grow more. So that was big. Subtidal leasing being very difficult. And everyone said, boy, you guys got it made in Maine. Being able to get the leases you are and having the system in place that you have, as well as the water quality testing that we have. In Maine, that falls on the state Department of Health to make sure that we're all safe. Out there, they're trying to push the farmers to be in charge of and foot the cost of water quality management. And that's definitely an issue when you're growing filter feeding bivalves.
Yeah, definitely. This next question you've already talked about a little bit, that has to do with regulations out west compared to in Maine. I think the only part that you maybe have more to elaborate on this point, if Maine can learn from Washington's history when it comes to regulations, because Maine's aquaculture industry is comparatively new compared to Washington's.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, the biggest, most startling difference was the intertidal aquaculture, and because they're able to purchase the intertidal land and use it as they see fit, that opens up a lot of opportunity, for sure. Not a lot of people went into much as far as regulation. Certainly some of the same concerns we hear about, like NIMBYism, people not wanting to see the aquaculture, but because it's so much more ingrained in their roots, and to even go back further, the first aquaculturists were the Native Americans. They have Native American clam gardens that were established thousands of years ago, using rock walls to sort of make little sections in the intertidal where they can allow clams to settle and that they can subsistence harvest. So it's definitely much more rooted in their history than Maine, but they face a lot of the same challenges we do.
Thanks, Kyle. We were just talking a little bit about scale. We have another question that asks, why do you think many of the Washington farms are larger than Maine farms? And how do you think Maine can scale up to a larger size?
Well, certainly, we visited very large farms where one company owns and operates multiple sites, both at Taylor and Penn Cove. Penn Cove is recently purchased by Pacific Seafood, which is a very, very large company. So I think they're able to do that. One, they're established, and have financial backing. They're using common processing facilities for multiple farms under one company's umbrella. That's huge. In Maine, it's owner operator. Evan owns all of his processing equipment and also does all the marketing, is involved in all the paperwork. That's hard. And I don't think a lot of Maine companies are scaling the way that these companies in Washington are. But again, some of these companies are over 100 years old, and family owned through generations. And I think that makes a big difference. And I think Maine will, but Maine also is fiercely like a cottage industry, where owner operator want the ultimate control over their product. And Evan can probably, he's been at this a lot longer than I have, so can probably speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I just think that I think Maine wants small scale. I just don't think the larger scale is really going to be the thing, especially with the shellfish, because you need leases in different areas, and it's hard to take care of all those different areas without having the right people. And so if you're spread out, then we don't have the sheltered areas that they have out there, I believe, that will allow for a large farm in one area. So, and they don't have any lobster fishing to speak of, so they're not fighting with anybody else for those acreage.
Thanks, Evan. We have a question about how many hatcheries are supplying oyster seed in Washington State.
Well, we went to the two, what I would think are the biggest hatcheries. Joth also has a hatchery at Pacific Hybrid, but I'm not sure how many other smaller hatcheries they have, or if there aren't bigger hatcheries, to be honest with you.
All right, well, we're bumping right up at 1 o'clock, so I think we're gonna stop our questions there. But thank you all so much for participating and joining us today. Big thank you to Kyle and Evan for talking about their experiences. It was a super interesting presentation. The geoducks are crazy. They're just such strange looking animals, but it was really awesome to hear about. So thanks so much, everyone, and hopefully to see you next month for our next webinar. And also check out the NACE if you haven't already. There's going to be tons of fun stuff happening in Providence this January. So stay up to date. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.